Welcome to the final episode of the Hot Summer 70s Family Horror. I finally got it right on the last one. This is actually, sadly, because this has been a really super fun series for me. We've been talking about 5 movies from the 70s that are basically in the horror genre. And it's been fun because Michael is not necessarily a huge genre fan. Actually, I didn't allow us to introduce ourselves, Michael.
Yeah.
I'm realizing.
And the show, which is the Family Pictures Podcast. And I'm Michael Branson Smith here with
Jim Groom, who can't introduce this show to save his life. Michael's like, you're going to introduce it. Are you ready this time? And I'm like, yeah, let's go. And then I mess it up every time. Anyway, so we're actually gone through. This is our 5th horror movie from the 70s. And I want to talk about a couple of things. So the movies we talked about, to catch you up if you haven't, and so you can go back and watch them. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. After that, we did Jaws, and arguably a monster movie, but we could talk about that. After that, we did The Hills Have Eyes by Wes Craven. So it's kind of interesting. Tobe Hooper, Steven Spielberg, Wes Craven. Our 4th one was, we just did The Brood, and that's with the great David Cronenberg. So there's 4 70s movies. And our 5th one is by none other than Stuart Rosenberg, right? You know the great Stuart Rosenberg, don't you?
yes, he's what we have here, Mr. Groom, is a failure to communicate, as he directed Cool Hand Luke. And you know, what's interesting is out of these 5 films, only 2 of them have like true classic horror film directors, right? Like Cronenberg and Wes Craven. This becomes their lane, if you will, or, you know, very different in their approach to it. But
Tobe Hooper a little bit, I think.
Yeah. I mean, Tobe Hooper is like, doesn't quite, you know, get into the class of Rosenberg, and clearly not Spielberg either.
Yeah.
But of the 2 of the 4, like, that become very successful genre filmmakers for decades.
Yeah. Wes Craven and Cronenberg. But and Cronenberg tries to move outside the genre, and I think to make success. But the thing about Stuart Rosenberg is you don't know what he's directed until you go look up his Wikipedia article. And like you said, he directed Cool Hand Luke. He directed a personal favorite of mine, the prison film Brubaker. He did Popes of Greenwich Village. He has a weird filmography, right? But this, I think, arguably, by far his most successful movie, the Amityville Horror. And what a success it was.
Despite the critics hating it.
The critics hated it, although it was one of those films like The Brood and others, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and even The Hills Have Eyes, that got reevaluated later on, in particular by Stephen King, and we could talk about that. But this movie was, you know, it's interesting, and I always have to fact check myself, so please fact check me, because I say things and then I listen to them. I'm like, actually, that's wrong, and I try and clean them up. Like right now, I said, you know, Halloween, right? The most successful independent movie for decades. Actually, it was only the most successful independent movie for a year. Yeah. Because in 1979, Amityville Horror, which was an independent movie, it had like a budget of $4 million, so significantly more than Carpenter, who had $300,000. Nonetheless, this movie makes upwards of $80 million, which in today's...
86.4 million.
There you go. And in today's terms, that would be $350+ million as a
which
return.
Is incredible. Like that's a clear, you know, double, possible triple of a movie. You know, not going for home runs like what we are so used to with blockbusters these days, which is obviously what Jaws became. But this is like, hey man, this is a very solid, and for its cost, it's ridiculous.
And this is actually produced by American Film, American AFI. It's like American Film Incorporated or something, by this guy, Sam Zarkoff, who actually, I have to get that right if it's Sam Arkoff or Zarkoff. I'll check on that. This is the last film of AFI. They basically fold, even though this is their most successful film
and
ever.
It's AIP. It's American International Pictures.
Thank you. American International Pictures. And I know them because they're the people who brought Bava to America In particular, in 1960, they had great success with importing Italian films. And so this is their last film before they get bought out because they're having all sorts of financial trouble. But this is a gigantic success, their biggest success by far. And the only film in 79 to do better is what, Michael? I'm kind of pushing this off without having said. We've mentioned it recently. We mentioned it in our last podcast.
I can't remember. I kind of.
I am sideblinding you. It's Kramer versus Kramer.
Oh, right. I saw that too. Right. Kramer versus Kramer is the number one film that year. And
so Kramer versus Kramer, then Amityville Horror, which is super interesting.
Yeah. And it's the divorce film. It's like Kramer versus Kramer is the divorce film, kind of like The Shining is the horror film that will be like, when we're ready, we will do. That's because these are two of the more important films in this family picture corner that we're carving out. We know they're super important. And, even if we like eventually think of like Steve Martin's Parenthood is like on a corner too, is like one of the more important comedy dramas because it's this wonderful ensemble. But these are films that I know we're going to get to at some point, and we'll probably provide context for them too, which I'm very excited about. But Amityville Horror was a film yet again I had never seen. And obviously what's interesting is, even though it makes all this money, critics yet again, like The Brood, freaking hated it. Roger Ebert, 1.5 stars. Like, what am I supposed to be afraid of? And that's what many of these reviews are. It's like, it's the house. The house is the terror, as much as the shark is the terror. And it's really interesting to see, like, of course people fall in love with this for a myriad of reasons. The first is it's grounded in reality. They try to play I think this is similar to The Exorcist, like things were happening on the set and, it's based on a true story. And the true story is, because the film opens with, we're seeing this house on a dark and stormy night. I always see, whenever I see like horror and I see there's like, it's dark and stormy, I'm always like picturing Snoopy on his doghouse with his typewriter, and he never gets past that first line. That's the trope of the Charles Schwartz cartoon, is like Snoopy always wants to be a novelist, and he always starts with on a dark and stormy night. And so on this dark and stormy night, it's revealed that, we're seeing in the house, there's gunshots, and it's based on the true story of Ronald Defoe Jr., who kills his family in his house. He kills his mother and his father, are both 43, and his siblings that are 18, 13, 12, and 9. And he murders them, and he tries to blame it on some mafioso in the area, and apparently his family got some connections to the one of the 5 families back in the 70s. And so I'm asking you, Jim Groom, that you grew up in Long Island. What's your connection to this story and this film from your, being, how far away where's your hometown from Amityville?
Yeah. So she has a great, Margot Kidder, who plays Kathy Lutz, has a great comment when she's like, "You've chopped enough wood for the South Shore." And in fact, I was on the South Shore. Amityville is a very similar town to where I grew up, Baldwin. Amityville is, I think, the first town in Suffolk County, where Baldwin's in the middle of Nassau County.
Okay.
But as a kid, this is one of the reasons I chose this film. As a kid, Amityville Horror was like, everyone in my town was like, it happened here. This is where it happened. We're at ground zero. So people would go there, and when you were watching the film, you felt like you were watching your town, and you felt like, the horrific story that really undergirds this, with the guy going methodically from bedroom to bedroom, killing his family, is always what kind of haunts you in the background. But what people would really talk about when they talked about the film was like, blood came out of the wall. There were pig eyes. The crucifix was upside down. There
in
were
black.
Flies.
Yeah, the flies. Oh my God.
There was black sludge in the toilet. To the reviewers' points, it's a strange movie in terms of the horror. But to your point, the horror and what I think so many people identified with, and Stephen King went back after his, like, I think he did a 79 or 80 review of this in Rolling Stone, he reevaluated it in his book, Danse Macabre, where he said basically, like, I now understand why the Amityville Horror is such a great movie. It is all about financial horror. And this couple getting in over their head with a house. Right. And there's so many factors, right, around, like, America in the 70s that is interesting.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the idea is that the horror is, sure, there's the murder in the family, but the horror is the family that buys the first family to buy the house, right? Because that's ultimately the story of the Lutzes. The Lutzes are the family, and this happens in real life. At what is the address? Like, I think it was like
106 Ocean Avenue.
Nice classic Long Island Ocean Avenue. Makes me there's an Ocean Avenue in Queens, like on its way to like Coney Island. So this is a very New York kind of street name too. And so the Lutzes are the family of 5 that buy this house. The first to be brave enough to buy it, but it's cheap. It must have been cheap, right? It's a cut deal, and it's it's around a year after the murders have taken place, and they actually leave the house after 28 days in real life.
The actual Lutzes family,
Lutz family, and they claim that there's the place is haunted and there's all this paranormal stuff, and they're so freaked out. And where do you stand on haunted houses and stuff like that? Are you a paranormal person? Do you have any thoughts or conditions that have made you believe in the paranormal?
No, I don't. Never. Like, I'm not someone who believes in haunted houses, but I like what they can represent.
Yeah.
Because, like with Amityville Horror, I think, the haunting of the house is the conditions of those living in it. Right?
Okay. And so, well, they write I think, the Lutzes have this writer who approaches them to take their story and turns it into the Amityville Horror, the actual book, which is written by J. Anson, and so that is the rights to which that Samuel Arkoff buys the rights to this book to make the movie.
Samuel Arkoff, yeah.
And so, it's the story of the Lutzes ultimately. And what is the story of the Lutzes? How do we meet the Lutzes?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk a little bit about the Lutzes. I love the Lutzes, but the actual Lutzes family.
Oh, the real Lutzes. Okay, sure.
Were kind of like a good old-fashioned, all-American hoaxing Long Island family in it for a quick buck. I don't think their house was really haunted. There were questions about whether. Oh, right. They said that the priest came over to bless the house, never came. Like, there were a lot of inconsistencies, and the idea is this was a kind of, this was a lie that they were promoting.
So this is a good Long Island hustle, right?
Yeah, it's a hustle, exactly. It's a good hustle, and it was a successful hustle for the family. Even though they only made $100,000 off the movie, I think they were hustling us. So anyway,
hey, $100,000 in 1979. That's a bankload of money. That's got to be at least like $300,000, I would imagine.
It would buy you a waterfront property in Long Island. We
absolutely
know that
now. Yeah. I mean, this house. So yeah, the movie Lutzes were introduced to them in this like classic kind of real estate porns gone 70s style, right? Because we have the real estate agent walking them around, and she's talking about, it's got this beautiful sun porch, the working fireplace. Look at that boathouse. Look at that potential guest house, and they walk up the rooms. But meanwhile, the real estate porn movie we're watching or TV show we're watching is interrupted. And I love to imagine like if real estate shows did this now, like this Fixer Upper, and it was like if they were really transparent. Like think about one of these shows that's like Fixer Upper. It's like a flipper show, and they buy the thing. It was like, we're gonna do this to the kitchen, but then it does a flashback that there was a murder in the kitchen. There was like some sort of drug deal that went wrong in this house in Phoenix, in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, because that's what's going on here. It's like she's walking them through through the stairs upstairs, and it's like flashback, gunshots, boom, 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 dead kids, dead kid, dead kids. And I was like, man, that would make such a good reality TV show if they did this. If it was a flipper show for homes that were like murders had happened.
Yeah, that's probably coming at this rate. Right?
Yeah, right. It's like people love these crime shows and whatnot. These,
Yeah, you marry the two, right? Like that would be a perfect
Exactly.
kind of mashup genre.
Yeah, right.
So to your point, we see the Lutzes, and again, like I fall in love with it. It's got the waterfront, it's got the boathouse,
Yeah.
and they.
Oh, and it's got Margot Kidder. Ooh, and it's
Margot
got
Kidder, who's amazing in this, and
Yeah,
she's coming off of Superman.
Oh, where she is so freaking adorable. Yeah. I've got you, Lois. Who's got you?
So Margot Kidder's great. And there's a moment where she comes out in like a Catholic girl outfit.
Oh
my
God.
What is going on? Like there's some fetish going on with the director. But like she's great in it. Margot Kidder's great. And her husband, George Lutz, is played by James Brolin, father of Josh Brolin. And there is this great resemblance between them two, but this very strong, manly man, right? Who's just, I love him. I mean, I love the cast.
But he's got that 70s Grizzly Adams look going. He's got the big hair and the beard. And it's like, this is where a man could have a lot of hair. And it would be... It would just be like, oh, hi, George, how's it going? Meanwhile, now we'd be like, George, dude, you need to like do a trim. But the Catholic Church does point that out later on.
Right, I was gonna say that the Catholic Church says to the one father who came back from Vietnam, Bolin, they say like, get a haircut, hippie, essentially.
Basically, yeah.
And to your point, the whole hair thing, and you brought it up in the notes. It's like as James Brolin goes deeper and deeper down into the house problems, he looks more and more like Charles Manson, which is yet another Manson reference.
Yeah, he comes back.
Yeah, it's great. And I have another Manson reference, which will be my hot take for this one. Hot take, but
hot take. Yeah.
So it is wonderful because they're walking around and like you probably have been through this. I have been through this. I bought a house before, and Antonella and I were in Virginia, and this would be the first house I would actually own. And we were going through it, and it was just after the market had crashed in 2008.
Yep.
And so we couldn't afford anything in Fredericksburg. But once the market had crashed, like we kind of went out of our house, our rental, and were looking around like, oh, maybe. There was a great old house which had similar windows actually to the Amityville Horror. I had those Dutch windows. And you went to this house actually.
Yeah, I stayed in your basement.
Absolutely. So anyway, did you see any holes?
No, but I do remember you blogging about fixing up your bathroom for a bit too.
Oh yeah, I did a lot of work on that, and there's some connections there, but I really identified with this moment where they were talking about it like, God, it's 80,000, and he's like,
I know.
Well, it could be 120.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't know. It might as well be 800,000.
Right.
Which was funny in today's terms.
And it was the classic, couple. It was a nice couple conversation. There wasn't stress. It's like, they're like, the trade-offs. They're talking about finances. They're like, and this is a way that they're presenting this married couple. It's like there seems stability. And we learn also during this tour that they've just got married, but they already have 3 kids. So this is an unconventional family. Like we learn later on that, Kathy is divorced, and we don't know any of the background other than that Father Delaney had been very helpful in her getting through that process, which is kind of shocking because, Catholics aren't supposed to get divorced. But aside that, this becomes an important piece because Kathy still leans on the church and Father Delaney in particular as providing this, place for shelter when problems occur, and the fact that in this film she's not able to access that becomes a real interesting touchstone. Though some of this stuff with the Catholic Church later on, I'm like, it never is completely fleshed out, and that's a nit to pick later on.
Yeah, and Murray Hamilton makes his way back into our
our life as yet another bureaucrat. Great. Yeah,
I love that. So I want to talk about this quick. So they are a great, like you said, great couple. They're walking through the house. The real estate agent is this weird kind of woman who always looks kind of scared and surprised. But like ultimately, Margot Kidder says or so I'm going to start using their names. Kathy says to George, hey, you know, should we be concerned about what happened here? Like,
yeah, I just wish those people hadn't died here. It's the quote. Yeah, me too.
And George says, which I think is a great memory, and it goes to, I think, a discussion we might have about what other films might have been influenced by this film.
Sure.
He says, homes don't have memories.
Yeah.
And that is something I don't believe. I don't necessarily believe houses are haunted, but I do believe they have memories, if you will. And I know that sounds contradictory, but I think a place has, the memory of what happened in it and the scars of it, or, the beauty of it. Like, I believe that. So anyway, I think it's an interesting quote from them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I remember when we did a renovation in our house in Brooklyn, and one of my favorite finds, like, they open up the walls, and this is a house that was literally built in 1920. And, it had been, classic kind of updates with the wood paneling in the basement and stuff like that. And behind the wood paneling, sitting in the studs that were framed behind it, there was a beer can, a classic from a beer manufacturer called Ballantine. And it was one of those literally like old school beer cans where you had to do the can opener. And I still have it. I just loved it. It was just like, and that's part of that history you're talking about, these artifacts of the history of the house. And, whether it's like someone, and it's behind me too, this house, there's the previous homeowner has the classic markings of time of children getting older and getting taller and taller. That's the classic. And my wife, when her grandfather sold his house, it had that, markings of time. And her brother Nick was so upset that it was because Nick was in there too. Nick and Amanda, and as grandchildren were measured as they got older. He cut it out. He got permission to cut it out. So it's like framed. It's like 70 pounds, but it's hilarious that it exists. It's like, no, I'm taking that part of the house with me,
Yeah. So, I mean, to that point, it's a great moment, right? It's this idea of home ownership. It's this idea of starting afresh, and you're really in it. It's an idyllic suburban house, which there are really on Long Island, the South Shore. Like, I really identified with that. But the horror of this movie, and we've talked about it, is really not all the different things that might come up. Like, there's a gateway in hell from in the basement to hell. But, like, what does it mean when you commit to a mortgage that you're in over your head on? Right?
Yeah,
and that's kind of the horror.
And a very perilous time economically, right? This is the 70s. So one of the things I learned, at this time is the mortgage interest rate. So there's high inflation. So, and this is something we've dealt with in the United States very recently, is that during the end of the Biden administration, what happens when interest rates go up? When inflation skyrockets, the Fed responds by jacking up rates because they want less money in the system to allow people to spend less, and that reduces it. Blah blah blah. This is not an economics podcast, but the bottom line is what happens. What happens is the mortgage interest rates go up, and this was literally the almost peak of mortgage rates. So not only are they overpaying, they're paying out of possibly their comfort zone, $80,000. The interest rate was easily 11, 12%. And that is about to be the peak in the history of the United States for interest rates, basically. And it continued to decline all the way through basically the early 2000s, which you saw when you bought your first house. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we're seeing now with interest rates getting up to 9 and people freaking out and changing the market altogether. So there's some parallels between now and this kind of moment of the house crisis that they're going through. But another crisis that is referenced again and again by him chopping wood is the oil crisis.
Right, the embargoes.
And the whole idea.
Yeah. Because OPEC is created in this time. Like, so we have the oil producing countries, they all gather and they start price fixing oil worldwide. And so this leads to
selling lemonade to cars that were on line waiting to get gas up the block from my house.
Isn't that crazy?
That was a thing. Like, I remember that going out and people being like, get this shit with their gigantic blue Chevy Impalas that have like 30-gallon gas tanks.
Right.
And I was sitting there selling them out, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, the only reference for us as adults is like, you know, in the early days of COVID, it was suddenly like, oh, the grocery store is running out of toilet paper and dishwashing detergent. You're like, what the fuck is going on with this planet? You know, it's so weird. You know, people like, what are we going nuts for? Yeah, but people freaked out, and that's the whole point. It's like, this is a time of panic, and populations behave oddly during panic. And I think this is a big representation. We have 2 oil crises in the 70s. We have inflation. We have we have a workforce that's struggling. We have women going into the workforce for the first time. And that becomes an important, I think, conversation point is, what is Kathy's position in this family? Sure, she's supposed to be the archetypical like homemaker, and George is the breadwinner who's, you know, supporting the family, but that starts to fall apart and their roles change, just as we're seeing that happen quite a bit in the 70s.
Yeah, and I love that she's the one always driving the van, which is the work van.
Yeah,
and
the surveying
I think there's
business,
something to that. Like, and she's kind of like, you know, she's in charge in some weird ways, which is not surprising. But I don't know where you want to go with this next, but one of the things I did.
Yeah, you go ahead. What are you thinking?
I was talking about. One of the things I did while I was getting ready for this book, after reading some of the stuff that King said and stuff, is I went through and I kind of highlighted the quotes that deal with
the financial stuff. Yeah, I love
related
those.
horror, which I just think is great. So I'm going to go through. Should I go through them, or should we work through the plot?
Well, no, we can. Well, the plot. What's kind of funny, as I was watching this, and I was doing what I normally do with these films, I take tons of notes. They were more detailed just because there was so much happening that was odd, and you had to kind of note it. But at the same time, it's not like a lot was happening. Right? There's just there's a couple primary things that are happening, which we can kind of say it's like basically George is kind of falling apart. He gets more and more haggard and stressed and menacing. His physical appearance, you know, completely, he looks disheveled. His eyes are dark and sunken. He wears this like sweatshirt eventually for like weeks on end, and it gets dirtier and dirtier, and he gets grosser and grosser, and he gets snippier and snippier with Kathy. And a lot of that has to go to the financial situation, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's the real horror of this movie, is how relatable it is for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Where do families and trouble start? Not always economic, but often economic, right? Can daddy make, ends meet? In the 70s is a really good question, because I think this is my own personal experience, and I wonder if it's true for others. It's like, my mom was a nurse, my dad was a teacher, right? And there was a moment, I think, during this crisis from the 70s into the 80s, that being a civil servant on Long Island, as you made that cross into the 80s, when things kind of exploded and money became a banker's world, if you will,
right?
Where you couldn't really make ends meet, even if both people were working, right? Both people at that point had to be working.
Yeah.
But then there was the question of, was that enough? And I think that's a transition for that point you're talking about, you know, the male breadwinner and women working in the workforce, part of because, you know, liberation, but part of because there wasn't an option. Right? Things were becoming too expensive. And I think that's a lot of what we saw in these 70s movies, is focusing on these men who are losing power and are losing themselves given conditions around them that they just can't control.
Right. And so how does this, you know, is this revealed through George's behavior? The chopping of the wood, the feeling cold, and the obsession over the fireplace. It's like, this is him fixating and trying to hold on to, you know, his control over all the problems that is around him, and he's clinging to, he's doing this like, well, I can at least fix this, like I can, it's exactly. Like, and so
I can chop wood,
right, and he's doing it more menacingly, like there's this entire scene where his partner, we learn throughout the film, like, and I love this is classic, they don't like explicate right away, you're like, who is this dude that's showing up with stuff, but you figure out, oh, this is someone who is business. We don't even know his business until you read it on the van. And so he has a surveyor's business, and his partner Jeff arrives simply to ask him to pay off, to sign off on checks for people that work for their business. And he's ignoring him, and he's literally sharpening his axe with a file. And it's so menacing, like he doesn't hear, he's so obsessed. And you get a sense like things are going wrong with the business. Maybe the number of clients aren't as much. Maybe they're losing access to, the loans that they need to keep work going. Yeah. And
you really feel that,
and he's talking about other things that were things, and he's alluding to, it's like, I know you've really stretched out yourself here. And there's a second one too where they meet up in a bar, and that one's my favorite because
I have that one quoted. That's one of my quotes.
Yeah,
it's so good.
Well, there's the quotes.
He goes on.
You go ahead. You take over this one. But I just love how you talk about how they resolve the argument. That's my favorite part.
Yeah. So anyway, the guy says to him, he's basically in a bar, and his friend meets up with him. He says, "I'm glad you have a drink with me." He's his partner, business partner, and he says to him, like, the guy's obviously George Lutz is in his own head. He's freaking out. He's almost disassociating from reality. And his partner says, "Bills have to be paid. Life goes on. I knew this would happen. I told you were taking on too much. You marry a dame with 3 kids.
Yikes.
Buy a big house."
Oof.
And then he says, "You change your religion and you forget about business." Great. And so at the end of this little tirade, George just basically, lays him out.
Yeah.
Just punches him right in the face. His partner gets up and is like, "Can we talk now?"
Yeah, that's my favorite part. It's like the machismo moment of like, that's all it takes. We just hit me, man, and now we can talk.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh my God, it's so fucked up.
But that's real talk, right? Like, you could see a friend saying to another friend, I could see this on Long Island, you got in over your head. You bought a house you can't afford. You're living with a woman you can't afford. You got other kids. Like, what are you doing?
But
right?
boy, she does some great ballet in front of a mirror.
But there's really that sense where the horror is not, the weird shutting of doors and flies, because that's kind of like kindergarten stuff.
Yeah.
The horror is everywhere, being surrounded with stuff like, for example, someone calls on the line, which is the priest, but they can't hear it because the house kind of blocks.
Yeah, I love that stuff. That's great to me. Yeah.
And so basically, Lutz says, probably discover it's a collect call from Japan or someplace when the next bill comes.
Yeah.
And that's another economic, financial kind of like worry. I mean, and it's hard to kind of understand that in this moment, but in the 80s, if you got a collect call from Japan, that could be a house payment for a month, right? Like, that could be a ton of money. Mm-hmm. So I love these little elements. They everywhere fit in with him worrying about the money and increasingly becoming a monster.
And it's not apparent, because that's the what horror is doing so well here ultimately. Because the haunted house, the audience is fixated on these silly little things like the window that opens but then it doesn't the window that slams on my son's hand and we can't open it but then suddenly we can, and all these like goofy, and the chandelier has this like little tonal range that kind of possesses someone in the moment, like the nun gets possessed, the Aunt Helena, who's a nun, which I thought was hilarious. And so the connections of the church are there, but she's suddenly overwhelmed with nausea that she has to leave the house instantly, but they're silly for the most part. And then it's only at the very end where they really kind of go over the top and it's like, no, we're a haunted house and the walls are going to bleed. But before that, it's just kind of silliness for the most part. And the rocking chair. I love the rocking chair, which is basically...
The rocking chair is good.
Yeah.
And it's another good example. Like, as much as it made a ton of money, this is low budget effects. Like,
Oh, yeah.
the closest they get to a special effect is they do the pig eyes, which is this movie came out, that's all anyone talked
Oh, really?
was the pig eyes. Like, it's almost like,
At the very end, yeah.
a gardener falling out of the bottom of the boat in Jaws. Like,
Yeah.
the pig eyes were all anyone talked about. And then there's another shot as he's going up to the room with an axe towards the end, paging The Shining. And basically, you see a vision of a pig.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
like-
Oh, so you're saying the pig eyes that Kathy sees versus the pig eyes, the pig with the eyes that
They're the same eyes.
that George
so
sees.
basically,
Yeah.
that's supposed to be a disembodied floating pig.
Yeah. Ooh.
And then you see it later. And then obviously pig, what does pig remind you of? It's what Manson wrote on the walls of the house of the people they were going to murder. Right? They called them the pigs. And so there's this whole other weird Manson tie-in with, so the horror of this house is the embodiment of a pig? Like, it's kind of weird,
Yeah,
right?
it's not a lot. It's really not. It's not, and that's what's kind of. But I see how people love it because it's not literally campy in large part because I think like James Brolin and Margot Kidder's performances are so earnest. Though I think at the same time Rod Steiger as Father Delaney is way over the top, and I don't quite understand the register of the machinations of the priests and what's going on, especially towards the end with the sergeant, which is I'm just like, what the fuck's going on? And that completely stays unresolved. But at the same time, what's important is that their lives are falling apart, and that's very clear. Like there's this scene that's supposed to be great. Kathy's brother is been invited to the house because they're the first, and this is something that's mentioned. This is why Aunt Helena wants to visit, and George is like, ugh, Aunt Helena. And she's like, but we're the first family to own a house, and we're the first in my family to own a house, and so that's why you get a sense that they're hosting his brother for his wedding, even though the wedding's somewhere else. But the house becomes the center of family, right? To join, and he has all this cash, and there's this great shot of him counting cash with fire in the background, like it's this, burning stress, and it's $1,500 cash, and it gets lost in the house. The house kind of eats it literally, you know what I mean? And so, which is so sad, and this becomes a point of stress even for George, because George, is like supposed to be the great big brother in here. It's like, I'll cover you because this cash was to go to the caterer because he insisted on cash. I don't take checks. You have those quotes, which are great.
Yeah, I love that one.
And
checks cash can't be know about the difference between checks and cash? Checks can be canceled. Cash is cash.
Cash is cash.
I love that.
And so Brolin says, I'll make him take a check. And meanwhile, this ends up, the check's going to end up, we learn through Jeff, his partner, that the checks, I hear that checks you have personal checks bouncing. It's like, Jeff, how the fuck do you know his have personal checks bouncing? But whatever. But the thing is, like, it leads to when they come home from the wedding, because George is feeling terribly again, like he's just
and he looks bad.
He looks bad, and so he's losing his control over his masculinity, his position in the family is manifested physically, like ultimately. And he literally is, I need to find that money. There's this scene in the living room where they're at the level of under the couch, and he's tearing through the cushions and trying to find that cash. Is like, it's got to be here. And all he finds is the bankroll, that tape that went around the bills. And he's like, no, and he's gone mad.
But think about it, though. It is interesting because I think, and I've been thinking about this film because I love the whole financial reading of it, that kind of King introduces and a lot of people subsequently reinforce, especially like we are now.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting about that kind of horror is when you're watching it, even as a kid I was watching it, it's a visceral horror. And it's a visceral horror not only of like, oh, I lost this money as an adult, but also as a kid, when you think about what would happen if your parents went into that kind of debt or started to go into this situation, like you knew everything around the house was going to change. And James Brolin or George is a great kind of, emanate or embodiment of that visceral horror of the financial kind of, as Stephen King says, demolition derby that's taking place in the lives of these people. And I think, that really is. And watching it now as a, 50 something who's gone through home ownership, like those horrors are real, and what it does to your relationship and what it does to your sense of, can I do this work? Another thing to repair. Yeah. I can't afford the oil bill.
Renovations. It's like suddenly, it's like, well, that's going to cost a few $100s, or that's going to cost, and then this feeling to change. Right. And that's the very American thing too. It's like, well, we got to fix this place up. And that's like presented even in this house from the beginning, because it's definitely a house in need of repair. And Kathy, Kathy's the first presentation of Kathy and George in the house at the start of the film, when they finally 1 month later after the tour of the house move in, is what is she doing? She's up on this stool and she's pulling sticker shelf paper out and putting it on the shelves to try to make them presentable, because the house it's pretty drab. Like, it needs definitely at least a fresh coat of paint, if not, some good fly paper to get rid of the in the sewing room.
I mean, one of the things that's true, and the other effect, because this happens in a very short period of time, like you said originally with the Lutzes, it's like 3 weeks all told.
Yeah.
And one of the things they do is like Thursday, 12.
Day 12. I love that.
Day 12 or Friday, day 18 or whatever. And so they kind of bring you in this weird timeline that doesn't make 100% sense, but whatever. But one of the things that I got kind of hooked on is the boxes around the house.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, they have an Altec Lansing, Series 9 speaker set, which with these beautiful wooden speakers.
Oh, yeah.
And they have another one.
Yeah, the Brood had great speakers, too. We never talked about the interior of their living room. It was amazing. Frank's living room was awesome.
It was awesome. And there's a Farberware turbo oven, which is one of those little toaster ovens that you would put stuff in. That was kind of a revolution before the microwave. Like, it was interesting. And I want to go back and go through all of those boxes. But everywhere was this kind of sign of the financial debt that this family was in. And
they're not
dealing with.
And they're not settled, because throughout the entire film, which effectively is 19 or 20 days, they're never fully unpacked, right?
No.
They have never completely settled into this house, and it's always a house in disarray. And, and this is even like, to me, whenever Amanda and I would move into a place, or we were just psychotic, we would just unpack until it was done, because we wouldn't feel settled. Like, we wouldn't feel like we could relax until at least we have like this base, like, we got to get rid of all these fucking boxes. And funnily enough, it is whenever people would visit us, they're like, whoa, you guys already unpacked. Good job. Because it is torturous. I mean, packing and unpacking it's traumatic. I mean, I was a mover when I was in art school. I worked for this well-known moving company in the Boston area called Gentle Giant. And man, you just dealt with people at their worst, in a hard moment, let's say. It's very stressful. Someone is taking all your stuff. 9 times out of 10, the best of the people were people that were moving out of an apartment into, say, their first house. They were upper middle class people that had degrees, and they're finally paying off, because this is the Harvard area. There's lots of smart people there, and they often were given access. And they were wonderful tippers, but others, man, they're so stressed out, and you'd see bickering, and you'd see the trauma of like seeing their stuff put in boxes. They wouldn't know what to do. You'd walk in, and we'd always like a job would explode when they're so unprepared, and suddenly we had to finish and take over the packing because they couldn't handle it.
Yeah, totally. I can see that. I mean, having been through it, I moved overseas.
Oh, Jesus.
And everything we had in our house just went into a storage area. And at some point, years later, I had to go and basically go through our entire house and decide this comes to Italy, this goes to Goodwill, this comes to Italy, and it was kind of, I mean, luckily I had the time and I could deal with it. And it was just me, and I would kind of FaceTime with Antonella. I was like, "Do you want to keep it? No. Okay, you want to keep it? No." But the other problem is I'm a fucking pack rat.
Yeah.
Like I have so much shit, and not small shit. Like big shit, like 80s video arcade cabinet stuff. So if I think about moving,
there's a blog you could read about this.
Yeah, but I start to get like palpitations if I think about that. So just seeing all the boxes and everything what's in them, I become like obsessive about it. I'm like, oh my god, because I keep all my boxes. My attic is full with empty boxes that I'm ready to refill. Like, so anyway, this is another piece of this movie that really hits is that idea of the home and the unsettled home and in between and the finances. It's like, it's so interesting to me because unlike Texas Chainsaw Massacre or, The Hills Have Eyes, for example, or even The Brood, this isn't about this nightmarish vision of a pig outside the window as much as we pretended it was as kids.
Yeah.
It is about the, quotidian, real life horrors of trying to manage a house in the midst of an economic crisis, which is interesting, right? It's a cool thing because it does everything we've been talking about in this series. Basically takes that idea of the allegory and doesn't even play anymore. It just puts it right in front of you and pretends there's little like ghost house shit but there's not.
They're like distractions ultimately, which I really appreciate. That's what I think is so funny. It's in that I can see how people liked it because the distractions were fun. And there is one literal jump scare in this when one of the regular events that's happening is George wakes up at 3:15 a.m. And this is the time in which, Ronald Defoe had actually killed his family. It was 3:15 in the morning while everybody was fast asleep. And so he sees the window is open again in his daughter's room. And so he goes to close it yet again. And then he spies that the light's on in the boathouse. So he goes out to the boathouse and you're expecting something to happen, but nothing happens. And so he comes in and he's like, well, I might as well have a cigarette at 3 a.m. And he's sitting there having a cigarette and a fucking black cat just like pops up and is really actually terrifying both to him and to the audience. And that to me was probably the only jump scare in the film, which is probably fun.
I agree with you. And I kind of liken a lot of those scares that we saw throughout the movie to the two brothers putting a tarantula on top of the fishing line and putting down and bothering the sister. And sister's like, leave me alone, guys. And then she's talking to the dolls and she's like, I'm going to kick your ass if you keep on behaving badly. Let me tell you something. So there was that whole
she's also talking to Jody, the dead girl.
That's right. Well, talking to those dolls though, but then Jody's in the background and she's like dealing with that. And the Jody is this great figure. And I kind of loved how low budget all of the effects of the house were to make it work. Now let's talk about something. And I don't know if this is where you want to go, but I definitely do.
Well, I have one way to go, but you go first.
I'm just interested. Well, actually, you go first because I think this is a good place.
I think
what I'm talking about.
I think Jody's kind of a good segue into how the women and even Amy see what's really happening. Like Amy's like, Jody's my friend. She tells me about how her brother was killed up here, and this is a moment which she's finally revealing to Kathy who Jody is, and Kathy's like getting more freaked out, like everybody's getting more freaked out in the house. But Kathy's role throughout, George's, falling apart is to be someone who sees like he's falling apart and saying to him and to them, we need to do something. And it repeatedly falls on deaf ears with him. And she's trying to pull him out of his like possession. It's which very much like The Shining, and this is something I think we're going to bring up later, which is really wild. Some of the references that lead to
that's exactly where I want.
But so
end,
let's not get
perfect.
there. We'll get there eventually. And so he's this possessed, and she is able to pull him out of his possession, and that's really important. One of the best examples is, she has the groceries in her amazing kind of like Catholic schooler outfit, which we're both like gaga over. And she drops the groceries and she goes to George to get help, and he's chopping wood and he's menacing, chopping wood. And he initially really snaps at her and says, like, just deal with it yourself. It's like, look, our week's worth of groceries, they're expensive. Money comes up again. They're on the ground. And he snaps out. And he gets drawn out, and he's suddenly a normal adult male who's like loving and caring and goes and helps. And this happens again and again until he kind of loses it. Like he almost goes, full Jack Palance. And Kathy initially turns, which is interesting too. She's trying, as the stress is increased, she tries again and again to turn to Father Delaney and the church, which had been so supportive in the past for her. But the house keeps blocking it. And there's all these goofy things that prevent it. Like the phone doesn't, they're not allowed to talk on the phone. Somehow the house takes over the priest's car and doesn't allow Delaney to return, and it drives out the road. And that one's just really hokey.
The hood comes over. It's like, what?
Yeah, it's nuts. But what's important is when she realizes like Father Delaney's not going to be helpful, she literally finally goes to the church. And this is the weird stuff, like with Bolin and the church, is like Bolin is like blocking her from talking to him, and you're like, what's up with Bolin? And the Sarge is following Bolin around, but whatever, that's like a side plot that's unresolved. She finally makes the choice to like, I'm going to fucking figure this out. And she goes to the library. And there's this great scene of her getting in the microfiche, which is such a technology from our generation. Like microfiche, which we didn't have the internet. And so what they did is they did these super high resolution negatives, photographs of newspapers. And you would literally look at the negative, and you would look at the newspaper through this machine that my wife can't look at, because if it spins, it makes her nauseated as it's going so fast and you're going page to page. And sure enough, she sees this image she's like gotten help from the librarian and says like, I want to see the newspapers that were published from the time of when Ronald Defoe killed his family. And he sees this photo of Ronald, and it's her husband, who is also Charlie Manson, right? Which is really funny. And so she races home, throwing herself at the husband. And this is at the moment when he's most obsessed, and he's wandering around with the axe. And this is where you should take but the idea is like, and a second point is the other Jeff's wife. I
want to say one thing there.
Okay, go ahead.
The clerk at the library who helps her with the microfiche is Peter Maloney, who's also in The Thing.
Oh.
He's one of the people in The Thing in 1982.
Okay.
And I rarely see him in other movies. So when I saw him, I was like, oh my God, he was in The Thing. Anyway.
There you go. And then Carolyn, who's Jeff's wife, also is in tune, and she's great. Like she's like got some supernatural clairvoyant shit going on, which is so awesome. And she's the one who
she's like a hippie.
Yeah, she's
like madam, like come, I'll read your cards or something.
Yeah. But she is the one that guides them into the basement of the house, where Harry the dog has been trying to guide George to this spot, this wall that's a false wall below the stairwell. And sure enough, she herself just starts hacking at she takes a pickaxe and starts like knocking at the stone, without permission from George or Kathy. And then George buys into this, and he, like with his man strength, busts through the wall very quickly. And this is the beginning of this real supernatural shit, which is kind of fun. It's a red room, right? It's red.
It's a red
and
room.
She gets possessed but
he's reflected in it somehow.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah. And this is, and Caroline seems possessed and says, "Find the well. It's the passage to hell. Fix it." And it's really great. But it's really basically saying, it's like, you're in over your heads, motherfuckers, financially. You got to get the fuck out of this house. You got to sell it.
Exactly. And the Lutzes figured that out, so they made up a story like the Amityville Horror, and they got out and they made money.
Right. And so, but it's, and at the same time, the last thing I'll say about this, which is interesting, both husbands literally tell their wives to shut up. Right.
Yeah.
And this is a really, stay in your lane woman, hearkening back to the men are in charge. Let us deal with the finances. Let us deal with the real problems. And this is I think a nod to women as they're navigating going into the workplace and dealing with men like, oh, you stay over there. I know we hired you in this role. And I think Mr. Mom's Terry Garr character shows that too, which is really wonderful. And they're navigating this world where they're supposed to be making more decisions and being in charge of finances, doing the double labor of being in charge of the emotional labor of the family at home while also doing the labor in the workplace. But at the same time, the men are still trying to say, like, I'm in charge here. And I think that stuff
right.
is really, it's kind of these are two other pathways you could navigate with this film of the 70s. And I liked looking at that a little bit.
Yeah, I do like that. And I think that's a good reading because it kind of holds up. Like, that seems to be James Brolin or George Lutz's biggest problem, is he won't work with her. She's like, can't we find a way to deal with this? Like, there's got to be something we can do. And he just gets deeper and deeper into his own head. And so she's the one, like you said, who takes action and tries to figure it out. And the other woman's like, actually, your house is built on a Salem lot of a witch, which is a weird twist.
I know. I love that. Yeah. And there's other weird twists too. But the important part is where you're going. Like, so in the culminating moment of this film, right, is where Kathy has taken action and she's racing home. She realizes her husband is potentially going to be the next possessed killer of a family.
What do you do with that, though? I just want a quick, sidebar. We see his face as the killer to the family, of the family that, the DeFeos who had been there before. Does that mean he killed them? Like, why does he look so similar to the person who was the murderer?
Well, I mean, we did have the bartender say, like, man, you look like the person who murdered his family.
Exactly.
I mean, I think it's this idea that, man, you look like every other man who has made their family miserable. And I think that's the idea.
When she sees the newspaper, his face is in it.
Right. Well, again, this is another shining moment we get to talk about ultimately.
Absolutely. Okay, it's a good segue. So, I know you were thinking about it. We talked about it a little bit beforehand, but let's talk The Shining right now. So,
and we're not doing The Shining because we're not ready to do The Shining, as we said again and again and again.
We are not ready to do The Shining. But it's interesting because it looks like Amityville Horror, even before The Shining came out, was ready to do The Shining.
Yep.
And that to us is a little bit strange. I mean, let's think about the similarities. You got the axe as the murder weapon of choice as he goes after his family. And there's that whole family violence going on in The Shining, too, that we'll talk about eventually. You have the bleeding walls, right? So you have all this blood coming out again and again. You have this strange, like you're saying, transposition of the father as the murderer historically of some other moment. It's like, what? As if, they only had to say to, Lutz's character, you've always been the caretaker of 106 Ocean Avenue, Mr. Lutz, for us to be like, oh my God.
Yeah, that would have been great. If the bartender had said that would have been literally if it was the bartender. Because that's the thing. It's like the bartender in The Shining is the one who reveals to Jack, you need to deal with your family.
It is crazy.
Yeah,
I mean, the amount of similarities in the last 20 minutes of this film to The Shining. So I went and I said, okay, let's look at this. When did Kubrick start making The Shining? Because it comes out in, I think, the May of 1980 or whatever. And according to production, it took a full year, depending on who you listen to make The Shining. So it means when this came out, The Shining was just a month or so in production. So it's very likely that Kubrick saw Amityville Horror, I imagine. I don't know. I mean, obviously he's not going to, and I don't know if it matters too much. Like, The Shining's The Shining.
I mean, The Shining, Kubrick does it all bigger and better ultimately, right? I mean, because like to just one comparison at least, it's like we have these nice little holes in the wallpaper where the blood is bleeding out in little streams. Kubrick has an elevator door opening with an onslaught, a tidal wave of blood flooding at us.
Oh, absolutely. But it does go, I mean, and so do with what you will, and it's interesting to think, okay, how much was Kubrick influenced We already know Kubrick was influenced by Texas Chainsaw Massacre to some degree. We have to assume that he's influenced by these 70s films, which lead to him deciding to make a horror movie and deciding to make The Shining. And we know that and it's basically in the air. But it's just interesting. A year apart, you have these two movies that essentially have the same kind of father turned psycho figure with an axe.
With a haunted house.
With a haunted house, exactly. Yeah. So it's super interesting. And I think one of the things I know we're kind of coming, and I don't ever want to leave this series because it's been so fun, but eventually we do. But it's worth noting, one of the biggest films probably of the decade that we have not really even talked about at all, but that I think more than The Shining, the Amityville horror is kind of referencing, is The Exorcist. And so The Exorcist comes out in 1973, and it is the highest grossing film of the year, which has never before happened for a horror movie. Friedkin basically breaks open Hollywood to rethinking the horror. So it is a really important film that we don't mention.
Right.
And I have to become clean on this podcast. I've never seen The Exorcist.
Oh, I've never seen the entirety of it.
So this is a film I have not seen.
Oh.
And I wanted to do it. Like, I had thought maybe to do it, but I was like, well, I don't know. I haven't seen it, so I don't know how tightly, although I'm sure it's a family picture.
Absolutely.
Horror. But I do think that's
you got a possessed daughter or a kid.
We have left out, and I know that. And I know there's always going to be holes in it. But The Exorcist, I know, is a gleaming gap. Mm-hmm. The other one, arguably, is the Halloween. But I think Halloween is more straight up the slasher genre, and we can revisit slasher and family in some weird way.
We have to.
We might have to, but anyway, we don't have to. But I do want to recognize The Exorcist, being such a gigantic movie, and I do think, I don't know why I haven't seen it, but I just haven't seen it. Maybe because I was so afraid of the Linda Blair, what I saw just, because 73, I'm a baby.
Yeah.
So the Linda Blair stuff. And you've done GIFs on this, so I know you've dealt with this in some
I turned her into a Cheeto.
It's horrific. And it is really horrific. And so the idea that I, even as an adult, was like, I don't think I'd rather not watch The Exorcist. Showing you maybe how successful that whole movie was in kind of scaring the shit out of people. But that was like Jaws. People lined up around the corner in the winter. Right. Like, it was a gigantic... And throughout the decade and beyond, became like an iconic film that impacted the culture indelibly. So I just want to recognize that. The Exorcist probably should have been on this list instead of Jaws. But be it as it may, the list was...
Well, at least I got Jaws as the only film I actually watched before we did this exercise. So, but I've really enjoyed it. I mean, I think that, horror is a genre I've generally avoided. Throughout my life, and like there were always exceptions. The Shining was the exemplar exception of like, this is a film you have to watch if you love film. There's no way you're steering around that. And I think I saw Friday the 13th at one point, and some of the stupid movies that teenagers watched, like, I Spit on Your Grave and, weird shit that kind of hit the weird. They became things of the moment, popular culture wise, as, and so I would explore that with someone who made me more likely than anything. But what I do love, what I've loved having introduced to me, is how much these films are about subtexts, right? Of dysfunction in society. We're focused on family dysfunction primarily, but so much of that is a reflection of societal concerns and the happenings of the time. And I kind of am looking forward to seeing how that's expressed in some of the more modern movies that we'll probably hit at other points,
Absolutely.
And so I know we don't know where we're going next. That's the funny thing. But we've actually, baked in some time because Jim's going on vacation. And these, even though you're not going to see this for another couple weeks, we're going to have some time to figure out where to go next. And so we're really looking forward to keeping this train rolling down the tracks of Family Pictures Podcast.
For life. That's awesome. Thank you all for listening, and this has been great. Super fun, Michael.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.